Now I don't know whether we were recording or not, because the wife broke in on the phone. When the phone rings from the wife, you never know what she needs to tell you. So I really don't know what's going on at this point. So I'll start. Hopefully, we'll see what comes out of this. And talk about decision making. There's nothing to do with the assignment, but talk about decision making. Grandson's graduating Friday night from high school, and plan was outside, I guess on the football field, and we were going, and it's supposed to rain Friday night, and if it was going to rain, then it was supposed to go inside to I think the gym, and then it was restricted to I think 2 people per parent per graduate, which means we wouldn't be able to go, but obviously the parents could go. Apparently, some people are not happy about that probability or possibility, what with the weather being crazy this next several days, that now they're hedging their bets and saying maybe it's going to be Saturday or Sunday, which throws off everybody else because parties and grandma coming in from Oklahoma things. And this is when I'm glad I'm not in the business anymore. But that's not a conversation for this. I don't know where I was. I'm going to pick it up from where I think I'm supposed to be, and then we'll play it out from there. So I'm bringing up the plan. I think I started to say something about existentialism because I did talk about this last week, and I sort of in passing. I know, but it can't be repeated enough times. So here it comes again. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Yeah, there was going to be a template. You have to complete this template. All right. Post it to discussion to the assignment board. A. B. Develop a 5-slide presentation. Not narrated, just the captions on the slide, explaining what your topic, how you came to the conclusions that you came to, and what we need to know a little bit more about. And reasoning, as I said, is that when somebody writes down needs assessment, well, heck, needs assessment means a lot of different things, and you need to maybe explain things across the board that much better. And I wanted that posted to, I'll put it up in the discussion slot. So you can get it up. Because I knew I started to say this, that several students have said they're very anxious to see other people's work, see what this looks like. In addition, I'm going to make the same slots, not for today, I don't think, available. So you can begin posting up what you've done or what you're thinking about for other people to respond to. They may say, hey, I have no idea what you're talking about, or hey, this is a great idea. Can I take a piece of it? And there's nothing wrong with that either. That's what the class is supposed to be about. So that's what this is about. Now, slow down, start again, Richard. And that means that come back to the existential point. What I did last week was I modeled for you, all right? And you can see that's this goal up here. That's the goal box, I call it. As a result of a needs assessment. You can't do this goal. No, I'm talking too fast. Pretty hard to write a goal until you do a needs assessment. So conceivably, you're going to do a needs assessment, which I'll come back to in a moment. And again, understanding that you're not doing the needs assessment, you're saying this is what you would do if you were doing a needs assessment about the issue that you were interested in understanding more about. I think I used the gap in achievement between English language learners and general education students. We'll stay with that, at least for the moment. And so in this case, I'm sorry, what I did in this case was I used a high absentee rate. It's interesting because the people who are concerned about absentee rates are still all over the place. Because they're so anxious to solve the issue that they haven't figured out what the issue is or are. And I've already had that conversation with them, and I think they're beginning to see some religion on that and see that you can't solve something that you haven't pinpointed yet, which is half the reason why something is controversial, quite frankly, as an attendance policy that has to be under consideration. Not only that, sometimes the solutions I see, and I'm not saying that I'm seeing this problem with the people who with whom I've been talking in this class is they often want to do illegal things. There's some legalities about this as well. You need to understand that. And that's things that each district has to take into consideration in order to come up with a legal policy that will get past the lawyers. All right, so in this case, we have a goal. The goal is the result of a needs assessment. In this example, it was to recognize, so here's your goal. Recognize 3 reasons for the high absentee rate. I made up the number 3. You could have said 10, you could have said 2. Don't say 1 because there's several reasons why there's a high absentee rate. And if you look at the template as you go left to right, on this first row, I've left it pretty much blank. For some reason, this one's not going in the right place. Let's see if I can cut it out and try it again. Put it here. There we go. That works better. There's the goal. Now, here's a rhetorical question. I mean, I'm not going to expect you to answer it straight away. How would you know, as a district leader, how would you know that you've answered that goal? It's pretty clear. It is, you've got 3 reasons, and they're valid. If you have 2 reasons, and one isn't valid, for a total of 3, then you haven't hit the goal. Simple as that. In this case, you really, actually, I guess you could call this an objective better than to call it a goal, but we'll stay with that premise for the moment. And then what are the strategies you're going to use? Now, this is a little confusing. I would be confused if I were you, because I'm also saying, well, the first strategy you have to have is a needs assessment, which kind of predates the goal. I guess the shortest answer is to not tell you not to worry about that. But I am telling you, everybody is going to do a needs assessment. That's your first strategy. How to meet your goal would be to do a needs assessment. And within that, you're going to identify, let me add to this now. Identify the ways you will needs assess. I'm going to model 1 for you in a minute. One you should do, that would be the SWOT. And I'll show you what that is in a moment. So what strategies are you going to use to get all the information that you need? Now, what I did there was what I said, well, having identified the strategy, well, I'm sorry, having identified 3 reasons why kids are out of school a lot, one of them being economic reason, I said, okay, here's a strategy, provide free and reduced lunch. That's just an idea I had. I don't know what it is, but what are your strategies? Your strategies to meet the needs assessment, not what you speculate about. Kids will, don't want to come. If instruction seems to be a reason why kids aren't coming to school, then you've got to deal with that issue. Give me 3 reasons. And so the rest of this is going to be a how are you going to do what you say your goal is? Now, I'll give you another one. Let's change the topic. Let's now we'll call it the gap between English language learners and general education children. Typically, and I'm making this up as I go along, typically general education teachers get very frustrated about working with English language learners because they just don't feel competent in it. And obviously there's truth to that. Sometimes they're willing or they feel so inadequate, they just don't want to do it. And they just think it's someone else's job. Now that's a problem. That's a systems problem. It's a shared vision problem. But what they're really doing is they're siloing and they're passing over their their responsibility to somebody else because it's past their own strengths. that's a no-no. But it is what it is. You could even use that. You could say, well, there's a lack of shared vision. Now you've got to look at explore shared vision problems. What'd you think of that? Another one might be to come back to this point that sometimes often teachers will feel inadequate about that, and the teachers will seek a strong professional development. I'll put down PD for professional development. Now I've got 1, 2, 3. Now I've switched the goal, don't forget. Just for argument's sake. Although reduced lunch might switch the problem over to English language learners just to mix it up a little bit. But now you begin to come up with ideas. Now, this is where you get to be creative, okay? You get to be creative about, give us some, what ideas work for PD? I had a class this past spring that the whole class was all English language learner teachers seeking to be certified as administrators. And they were knocking me down with the ideas that they had I had never heard of. I think pair share ideas and study buddy premises to help the children help each other, to help the teacher more nearly individualize. There's all sorts of things you could think about. You think about what's good instruction here. What kind of PD does a general education teacher need? The harder one, actually, would be the one above that, would be explored shared vision problems. How come, besides their sense of inadequacy, how come teachers will do that with special education children too? I can't do anything with these kids. I'm going to refer the kid. So they refer the baby for testing. And, more often than not, they're correct. The child may have some severe learning disabilities that have to be addressed by specialists, but not always, because it's very easy to pull that refer them trigger, I call it. Very easy to do that, as it is with ENL children. You've all experienced that. When I was a social studies chair back in the day, I used to distribute the IEPs to the high school social studies department and go over it with them in a faculty meeting. And a lot of the IEPs were extended time on tests. And you know what I'm talking about here. And so what would happen is, if the test was half hour long, and the kids go past the 30 minutes, the teachers would take the test from the kid. Okay, you're done. And we said, well, you can't do that. I mean, they got extended time. And I said, when we even provide a place in the library with an aide to have them take the test there with extended time. And the teacher would say, I don't believe in that. And finally, one day I said to one of them, I said, with all respect, I don't care that you don't believe in it. It's the law. An IEP is the law. We are obligated to meet that IEP, and that IEP stipulates this child gets extended time. So don't be telling me that you don't want to give the kid extra time because it's against your philosophy. Your philosophy is subordinate to what the law is. And that's a little silly, I know, but that's really how you sometimes need some people to hear that. So otherwise, you get sued. And Bernardo, don't intend to be sued about it. You're going to be sued, and we can't defend you for that. That usually catches their attention. But they come back to this one. What are reasons why teachers aren't able to deal with special populations? Why isn't it a whole school problem? Or on the other hand, what kind of PD would you give? You can get more specific there. So let's take the PD line for the moment now. Now I'm going to skip these here for a moment. Timetable, people, yes, buts, and resources. Let's go back up to needs assessment for a moment and take a hard look at this. This was a strategy I've said to you before. I'm insisting on everyone does first. A needs assessment, you're going to identify three ways you're going to needs assess. One of them is a SWOT. Identify the three ways you will needs assess. One of them is going to be a SWOT, and I'm going to explain that in a moment. So there's three reasons for that. Now I want to go over here. Now we go over to, well, how do we know that the needs assessment worked? Well, the information was valid. Clear enough. So if you did a survey, I mean, we talked about this last week when I asked you, well, if we think that a student, if we asked someone whether they, true or false, they've stopped beating their dog, and again, I apologize for the example, that's a no-win item question. You can't ask that survey question because it doesn't tell you anything. It's invalid. Sometimes people come up with invalid recognitions. When you look at some of the political polls, who favors which candidate and how many, what the percentages are, you look at it carefully, you can see that so much of that is pure nonsense because the questions they ask are just silly. They don't ask anything. And as I said last week, a survey is a valid instrument for perceptions if you ask the right questions. So if I ask, garbage in, garbage out, if I ask bad questions, I get bad information. It's not valid. I can't use it. Okay. Good information might be, well, here's the demographic trends. Percentage of ENL children will go up by 5% a year for the next 5 years. Can the demographer prove it? They can show you how they've come to that conclusion. That's valid information to work with. So be careful what you say there. Or you have a focus group. How would you know whether a focus group is valid? When the experts, I should say the participants, listen to each other's points of view, try to come to reasonable conclusions. What would the criteria for that strategy be? That is between the strategies and the criteria. They're kind of greens. They kind of go together. I'll know whether I'm meeting my goal if the criteria for the completion matches the strategy's intention, which meets the goal. I'll say that again. I will know that these are all in sync with each other when the strategies that you identify meet the criteria for valid completion and connect to what the goal is. No one said this to me. I'm making this up. If you wanted to punish parents for poor attendance, that's a strategy. Okay, it's not legal, but it's certainly a strategy. Well, how would you know whether that worked? More parents are in jail, or the more kids start to come to school. I guess the second one, although again, I don't use that strategy because that's not legal. I shouldn't laugh. So they all have to kind of sync together within those systems issues that we've spoken about in week of 618. If I want to explore professional development, that's too broad, but I have this. Seek PD. Seek PD about what? Individualization, learning how to speak Spanish. So about what? Okay. Multisensory approaches. Dual language approaches. Okay. And you go from there. How would you know whether they worked? Now I'm going to put my foot in my mouth a little bit here, but I'll give you an example. Here's the answer. One answer, not all the answers. And notice I use the word criteria. Criteria is a plural word. You really need to come up with multiple ways to measure something, as hopefully you know. But I'll give you one criterion for seeking PD about individualization. as a potential solution to the academic issue. You ready? I'm making a face. Here it comes. Kids' scores go up. Well, the gap between English language learners and general education children narrows. How would I know whether giving free and reduced lunch to students will increase their attendance rate? They come to school to be fed. They're in school. One more time. The criteria has to support the strategy. The criteria and the strategy must support the goal. That's easy enough. Yeah, the next piece to that is, let's go back to the middle pieces. I don't want to make these a slouchy thing, but these are the really important ones, I think, the greens and that yellow. Now, the timetable is when. And this is a weak muscle for me. When I come up with a 3-year plan with a group of people, I often make the terrible mistake, it's a bad mistake, of front loading everything, so that everything has to be done tomorrow. I can't do that. You got to pace and space, strategies out, so they're not tripping all over each other. If they're happening simultaneously, you have to be clear about how that's going to happen. But the short story is, when will these things can be reasonably expected to be completed? Now, if you say February 12th, 2024, you're making a terrible mistake for them, usually, because then when you're really locking yourself into 1 out of 365 days in the year. So usually what I always suggest is seasons or monthly things. By February 2025, by the spring of 2024, this kind of thing. And you go from there. Okay? And that's not easy to do. It's not as easy as it looks. And obviously, timetable goes first. So, for argument's sake, you put the timetable up, summer of 2023, fall of 23, and the other things are going to flow from that. Okay. Persons responsible is important, too, very important, actually, psychologically, because you can't say the principal, the parents, the teachers. That's not good enough. You should name names, like Mr. Smith, Mrs. Jones, Ms. O'Connor, so forth. Name names. Now, you can't name names because you don't know any of these people. So in your case, it's okay to say the principal, but only because we don't know the names of the people we're talking about. Obviously, the timetable has to be in sync with the criteria, with the strategies, and the goal. Person's responsible is the person responsible. They're the one's got to answer for it. And it's interesting because if you don't have a name there, people tend to point, oh, I thought you were doing it. Well, hold on, was I supposed to do that? You were serious about that? That kind of thing. Okay, this next column is, I think, an important one. I'm going to color code this one. This is what I call the futuring column, the yes but column. It's a negative column in a certain sense. What could go wrong? Identify what the things are that could get in the way to obstruct getting the strategy done. Here's one for needs assessment. Maybe the union will say, we don't want to do this. We think it's against our contract. You run into nonsense like that every now and then. Sometimes it's valid, but most times it's needless obstruction. Now, better you should be aware that this could be an obstruction than not. So you have some sort of way to help make that happen, grease the wheels. You might get pushback from people. I don't like to do this kind of thing. I don't like my opinion known, this kind of thing. And we should be ready for those things. You'll see that in the SWOT analysis in a moment. Now, resources are resources, and resources is a tricky one in certain senses. You can't have a plan without resources. You can't do a needs assessment with one arm tied behind your back and no money and no time to do it. That's ridiculous. So the good leader is going to assure herself and the group that they have what they need to get the job done. If they need materials, they have it. If they need technology, it's there. If they need expertise to read the data and help them understand the data, of course you're going to have that. If you need time, you're going to have that. If you need to bring in an expert from the outside, expert from the outside, we'll give you X amount of money to do that, to go find that person. That's how it works. All right, so now what I need you to do, and I'm going to keep coming back to this. Next week, I'll do the same thing, but this is essentially what you need to do. You should have already in your own mind. I'm going to show you how to do a SWOT analysis in a minute. But what you need to do in your own mind is to assure yourself that you've got your needs assessment in place. You've created, okay, make-believe data in your mind from this. Okay. You're assessing it to make sure that it's valid and that it's reliable and that it will work. And from that, you came up with a goal. In this case, I used 3 reasons for high absentee rate, but whatever reason every issue you're looking at, okay, and you see, and then you lay out your strategies. Now, we're going to work on this slowly now, the next couple of weeks. Keep working on these strategies. Keep showing me some strategies. Send them to me. The first thing I'll do is let me see the goal. If I like the goal, then I'll say, okay, show me strategies. And I'll give you the feedback you need to continue. And this timetable, people responsible. I'm sorry, then we go to criteria. And when you think you've got those all in the same chute, C-H-U-T-E chute, then you go ahead with people responsible, the timetable, what could go wrong, and what you need. That's the plan. That's what an APA is. And you can show how the whole plan meshes together to meet the need that you identified. Now, let's roll back for a moment. And do another grid. Now, I'm going to presume that, I don't remember, I don't think I've shown this to you. I'm going to presume that you have heard of what I'm about to show you. Most teachers have, but not all, okay? Most leaders have, but not all. So let's talk about that for a minute. That's called a SWOT analysis. So first, let me show you what it looks like. I think we're going to go to another page. So I have a lot of room. Going to insert the table. This table is going to be 2 by 2. It's going to look like this. And I'm going to make it bigger. And we're going to give it a name. Okay. And this is going to be kind of bland, right? And you need to kind of do this on your own to so that you can use this as a needs assessment device. So I want 3, I'm giving you 1. So I really want 2. All right. And again, understanding that we're making this up. In fact, you can do this about your district. That's probably the one valid one you can do. Now, here we go. SWOT is a business technique. It's very simple on the face of things, and it's not when you look at it more carefully. And it's an acronym, stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Again, it's been used about 1 million times in 1 million places, and it's kind of losing some of its punch. And there are probably better ways to approach this, but for simplistic terms, it will work for you to get your needs assessment off the ground. And so we're essentially, if you're like several of you and you're interested in attendance, what are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of the current attendance policy? If you're worried about curriculum alignment, what are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of that? If you are worried about the morale, as one of you pointed out, and climate in that building, what are the strengths and weaknesses and opportunities of the climate culturally in that building? So I'm going to try to fill in some of these as we go along. Now it's pretty clear. Now, if you were going to do this yourself, when you become an administrator, you should do this with groups as you think it may work for you. And the short story is that there's a little bit of wiggle room in some of this, and you have to be careful when you do this with a group. It's a graphic. It's a what's the word we use in writing? It's a graphic organizer. It's just a way to get people to sort of categorize their thinking. What I usually do is, one thing I always do is I do it individually. So I say to a group, okay, let's do a SWOT analysis of your reading program. Well, let's go. The books are wonderful. What's a weakness? Well, they're all the same book. All right. There's no flexibility. What's a threat? Well, it'll bore kids because it only meets the average kid's needs. What's an opportunity? Well, we could use this book to connect it with something else. You got different kinds of books. Well, a varied set of books to really address the whole 3-dimensional piece of what reading instruction is about. All right. That's really how it works. The only trouble with the way this looks now, it looks as though it goes strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. It really goes clockwise. Just remember that. And the next thing I would do is I would say, okay, let's get in a small group. And I put people in a small group and we do the same thing. Now, what have you got about strengths? What have you got about weaknesses? Now things get interesting. I'll come to that in a moment. And then after they begin to come up with a common SWOT among the small group that you do, then you bring it back to the whole with a W and say, okay, let's see what we can make out of this. And then you get some good mud wrestles going on, because what you thought it was a strength may not be a strength to some people. They may see it as a weakness. Now, let me model that for you. I did this in a U school district on Long Island. At one time, it was the largest school district in the state outside of the city. It no longer is. I think it's maybe the 3rd largest now. At any rate, huge school district. A lot of schools, a lot of kids, about 10 or 15,000 kids for a local school district. That's a lot of kids, and huge staff and so forth. So when we did the SWOT, we said, okay, what's a strength? And immediately people said, oh, our size is a strength. We have a lot of courses we can offer. We have different kinds of programs than some other districts have. Okay. I'm thinking of Bridgehampton for a moment. Bridgehampton is a school district. When I was consulting there, it was probably 120 kids, maybe K-12. Then I'm thinking of a Sachem, for example, and it had 12 or 13,000 kids. Now, I would say to the Bridgehampton people, what's your strength? And they would say, our size. And then I would say, okay, so what's a weakness? And they would say, our size. Some other persons would say it's our size. I said, well, we can't be in 2 boxes at the same time, can we? Knowing that we could, actually. Tell me about that. And the reason was, it said the whole senior class was 6 kids. So how could they run an AP class? They couldn't afford to run an AP class because of the number of kids that they had. However, they did think that a strength of being small was that every child was getting her needs, his or her needs identified early on, which wasn't really true, well, at least not then, but seemed to make some sense. Where in opposition, the idea was, yes, we had plenty of programs in a Sachem, but at the same time, maybe kids fall through the cracks. A lot of kids in every class. How do you coordinate all that? It was an elephant to manage, big time. And so then that's one thing that will happen. Another thing that's even more dangerous. That's fine. That's not dangerous, because what that will mean is that they're just seeing it from a different perspective. Nothing wrong with that. It's great. Then you have to hack it out a little bit. But then you get some things like, and this is even more complicated, is that someone will say, well, the strength is all our kids care. And someone will say, well, the weakness is the kids don't care. People will say things like that. And the problem with that is there isn't any data to substantiate something like that. How do you substantiate it? There are ways to substantiate it, but you can't just make those kinds of sweeping generalizations and get away with it. So the good facilitator, in your case, you as leader, district leader, you will say, if you have something that we think may not be necessarily valid, we're going to have to research it before we put it in the box, which makes sense. So this is not a brainstorming shot where you can write any old thing down. Think of the first thing that comes to your mind. Donkey, and the next thing is it's not a brainstorm. It's not freewheeling. It's a structured thought process, analytical thought process, mostly left brain, not always all of it, but mostly left brain, where you're trying to really sort out, the deficits and the strengths of the district or of a program or a classroom, any way you want. It's also complicated sometimes for people is what opportunities means. The reason why opportunities is the word that's there, because it makes the acronym work. But I don't like that word opportunities myself. It should be a goal, which goes back to your template, if you think about it. What's your template? As a result of the needs assessment, your goal is recognize 3 reasons for a high absentee rate. Okay? So here we are over here saying, well, what's your goal? Well, an opportunity. We have a chance now to find out why the kids aren't coming to school. So a goal is to do a needs assessment. That's a goal. So opportunities is the word they use to make the acronym work, but opportunity is not necessarily the better, to convey the right meaning, which is for you to do what goals emerge. What's interesting often is the threats. And depending on the times, okay? I've been doing SWATs long enough to see different threats emerge at different times. I'll give you two different examples, and you can relate to each of them, certainly at least to one of them. And right now, they're lying a little dormant. There's 3 threats I can think of. They're lying a little dormant is taxpayer groups. Sometimes senior citizen groups, but you can't make villains out of them necessarily. They're more prone to not be in favor of tax increases, obviously, but it's not like they're necessarily trying to torpedo the whole district. Well, some of them are. So taxpayer groups, tax pack crowds, they come and go. Right now, they're kind of quiet on Long Island, but they're always out there watching how things go. And what they did actually get, I guess, about within the last 10 years, they got a tax cap put in place on state expenditures on the district expenditures on tax rates, and that was a big help. It was viewed as a threat very much by districts, by superintendents, but it really is. It's kind of worked out. So it kept the expenditures somewhat from going runaway, and not always, but somewhat. But the taxpayer groups can be a threat. If you're doing a SWOT analysis on the state of your DEI systems, your diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, you're getting pushback on that right now. That's, I think, kind of slid backwards a bit now. It's not quite as intense as it was last year, but I don't think that's going away anytime soon. One of the reasons why is because people don't understand what we mean by DEI, or don't understand what they think CRT is not what the CRT actually is. And unless you communicate that with better, which is the opportunities box, people will tend to think negatively about that. And the third choice, I forgot. Let me think. This wasn't one I was thinking of, but sometimes you have undue influence by special interest groups. So the music people might dominate the school. All decision making is based on what the music people want, or the athletic people want, and that becomes an issue of itself as such. So for some reason, the third idea got away from me when I thought of the DEI one. I remember. Antipathy to public education. That's a big one. That doesn't go away. It's been around for a while, and it still stands to be, especially depending on how the government begins to change its policies. Depending on the administration, quite frankly. Republican administrations tend to more nearly favor charter schools and vouchers. And voucher is every parent, every family gets X amount of dollars. You can spend the money by sending your child to the public school down the block, or to the Catholic school down the other block. And so the public school doesn't get that money. It's more just distributed where you want your tax money to go. So like deciding which fire department you want to put your fire out. That's a big threat right now, because it puts a lot of threat on the public schools to compete, which is what the Republicans want, which isn't necessarily a terrible thing, but it's certainly a frightening thing, to make themselves better and to make themselves more attractive to a school system. So it's vouchers, private schools, parochial schools of all kinds. There's some real threats out there for that. Real threats. I can think of several school districts that are under the gun on that, and it's really hurt the public school systems. And that's an issue, no question about it. And so if I were doing a SWOT analysis of an entire district, it'd be one thing. If you were going to do a SWOT analysis of the attendance issue, what are the pluses of what you do? What are the strengths? Maybe there aren't any, but I doubt that there are none. What are the weaknesses? Maybe you don't have enough manpower to go police the attendance rates. Forgive me, maybe you have really poor instruction. The kids don't want to come to school because they're not learning anything, especially in the high schools. Maybe it's an economic issue. So a SWOT analysis is an interesting device, because you can use it after you've done a needs assessment specifically, or you can use it in tandem with a needs assessment to really get your arms around things. And then you get to I'm going to put the color there. Then you get to the yellow, or the blue guy at this moment, whatever color that is. You get to that color and you say, okay, what are our goals? Now you can slide back up to goal. The real goal, not not a strategy. A goal is not a strategy. goal is, an objective or a target, do something. So I can think of 4 things I've heard from the build from you as a whole, all 13 of you. I heard attendance. Those ladies are ringing my bell a lot. That's fine. And they're beginning to see many more facets than they originally saw, which is great. I love the reflection. Love the reflection. The other group I'm hearing is gaps in gaps. Oh, I just thought of another one. Gaps in instructional achievement. Another one I'm hearing is morale. And I'm also hearing my friend from Valley Stream, I think she's from Valley Stream, who talks about the instructional needs and seeing gaps in the instructional needs. Sounds like a PD issue, by the way, but I don't want to oversimplify that for you. Now, what we're going to do for the next week or two, I'm going to just keep coming back to this. Coming back. And then probably, I want to say maybe right before the 4th of July, the week of July 2nd, I'll probably give you some more direction about that five slide PowerPoint, okay, and how to make this all come into bear. In my view, I'm not telling you that this is not a gum between your eyes. You have to do this. It's not. What you could do is you could begin to give me a completed template, not the PowerPoint, a completed template by week after the first week in July, for me to give you some feedback on it. This way you'll feel more comfortable about whether it's ready to be published, so to speak. So I'm hopeful with that. This might be in 2 pieces, this video, but I'm hopeful that you can see how Bernardo's trying to move you through this. I'm having a meeting tonight at 4:30. If nobody shows up, that's fine. I'll have dinner with my wife. But if anyone wants to come on and ask me any questions at all, I'll be glad to do that, and I will record it. So if one of you comes on, I'm recording for the whole class. Doesn't mean you have to watch it. I'm recording for the whole class, so no one feels like they've been left in the cold, because 4:30 is a tough time for a lot of you, I know. Okay, take care.